So the purpose of this model 1.1 and the purpose of our model videos throughout this particular unit is to show you how you actually do things within Microsoft Excel, or a little bit later on using SPSS, a statistical package for the social sciences. How to actually navigate those platforms, where you click and in what order to be able to do things. We appreciate in the unit that some of you will already be quite fluent with these programs, and some of you might be opening a program like Excel for the very first time. So I need to make sure that these models are delivered in a way that is catering to all of you, no matter where you're at. So we start off quite gently and we build up our skills over the course of the unit. In this first model, 1.1, related to an exercise I was talking you through in some of the vodcasts for week 1, I'm going to model for you how to create a frequency table firstly. After that, a grouped frequency table, and then a histogram based upon the data we talked about in the vodcast. I'll go back and just remind you what that data is. Here it is, this data here. The 40 pieces of data that related to the number of days that a person in a law firm has taken as recreational leave in 2019. So, in order to be able to do these things, we're going to use Microsoft Excel as part of the Office 365 program that's available for you to download as QUT Law students. And you'll see here that in the sway for week 1, this Excel document is available for you to work from. So we've got our data nicely laid out here. So how do we go about firstly creating a frequency table? There's a number of different ways to do this within Excel, but I think there's one way that's far easier than the others, and that involves us creating a pivot table. So firstly, to create a pivot table, you need to click somewhere within your set of data. You need to click Insert, Pivot Table. That will bring this box up here. Firstly, make sure that your range of data is actually included. And what's important here, just as a starting point, is that you have a heading right at the very top that explains what your data represents. If you just start off with your numbers, sometimes Excel assumes that the very first number in your list here, it would be the figure of 10 days, is actually the heading for your data set. So make sure that you've got a heading up there, and then Excel will be able to tell, because it's non-numerical, that it's not part of the data set. So we've got the appropriate range highlighted there. I'm happy with that. Next, we decide where we want to put our pivot table that's going to help us create our frequency table. I'm going to put the pivot table in this existing worksheet here, and I'm going to put it in this cell C1. Click OK. That brings up this sidebar here for pivot table fields. The first thing I want to do here is I'm going to take the field name of recreation leave in days. Again, that's another reason why you need to have that heading there at the top. And I want to make the recreation leave in days my rows in the frequency table. And you can see here, these are all of the numbers that exist from our set of data here, arranged from smallest to largest. Those are all the possible, those are all the scores that come from our data set. The next thing I want to do then is I want to drag this recreation leave in days and drag it into the values column, and that's going to be eventually the frequency of people who had that many days of recreation leave. But if you have a look here, it's calling that at the moment the sum of recreation leave in days, and I need to change that by double clicking on this button down here, or right clicking sometimes, and you can click on field settings, and I don't want the sum, I want the count or the frequency of people who've taken recreation leave for that many days. So if you look at my data set, that's showing me that one person took 0 days. You get down the list here and you can find that one person there. 2 people took 2 recreational leave days. There's a 2 there. There's a 2 somewhere else in the data set there as well. Okay, so you have the beginnings of a frequency table there. That's not a grouped frequency table, however. And one of the things I might show you very quickly before we consider grouping the frequency table is to create the column of percentages down the side. There's a couple of different ways to do this. You can either go back down here and right click on count and go back to field settings, or you can get to that same box by double clicking up here on that heading count. What I want to do here is, this has got the number of people that have taken that many days of recreational leave, the frequency. And that, at the moment, that's shown as a whole number. But I want to show that data as a percentage of the grand total. And click OK. And that would give me all of the percentages. Unfortunately, those percentages replace the count that we had before. So one of the things I often do as a shortcut is I copy, whoops, didn't want to format that. I wanted to copy those cells and then I can paste those cells over here. Then if I go back up here and I change that back to show data as no calculations at all, that will just take us back to the count of data. Then here, if I wanted to create a new column heading and call it percentage, you've got a frequency table there. You can obviously tidy it up a little bit to get it to look the part, but there we have the possible values, the scores, the frequency in which each of those scores is occurring, and the percentage as total showed there. All right, so that gives us a frequency table. Say I want to do a grouped frequency table again, because I'm looking at that and to me there's far too many rows there. The same problem that we were talking about in the vodcast. If I want to group each of these values into groups, instead of just having each value as being a single row in and of itself, I would click on somewhere in the frequency table. I then right click and I click on that button group there. And this will start to group some of our values together. I want to start at 0. I end at 33, which is my top score. And I'm going to group them. I'm going to set my class width as being 5. And you click OK. You have a perfectly grouped frequency table there. There were 4 people who had between 0 and 4 days of recreational leave, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, etc. So that's how you create a grouped frequency table. The final thing that we needed to do in this model 1.1 then was to make a histogram. I'm going to make the histogram on the basis of the grouped frequency table. I think that's more appropriate just because there's so many possible values in recreation leave here. To do that, I would select my whole frequency table or my whole pivot table. I would then click on Insert, and I want to insert a chart. The particular chart I'm after here is going to be, you see this icon here that looks like a histogram? I'm going to click the arrow beside that. I'm going to click on a 2D column graph. And it shoots me out this particular graph here, which is looking the part at the moment. Though you might remember that in the vodcast, I said that if there are gaps between the bars, that's a bar graph, but it's not a histogram. And we wanted to create a histogram here. And unfortunately, Excel's a little bit funny. It doesn't just create a histogram or give you an option to create a histogram off the bat. What we actually have to do is we have to click on the chart and start having a look at the design of the particular chart to remove those gaps. So I'm sorry for the mucking around there. If I want to actually start editing this chart here, you can click on a component of the chart and double click on it, and it'll bring up this format plot area here. Or if you click on a particular bar within the chart and double click it, it'll bring up this information here as well, formatted data point. What I'm interested in doing here is you can see under that column icon there's a button that says gap width. I might just increase the size of this a little bit so it's a bit easier for you to see. Back here, and if I take that gap width and I reduce it back to 0, then we have a histogram. When I look at that, I think, oh, okay, that's almost there, but it's missing a few things. I usually like to see a histogram with the lines marked on the inside. Again, that's not a necessity, but it's a personal preference. So if I click on the histogram there, and if I move to here under fill, now we're talking about formatting here, so away from those columns and over to the paint bucket here, and I change the color of the lines within the diagram to, whoops, to black. Maybe I'm looking here for the border. That's much better. Not the whole color, just the border there. I click off it, you can see there that we've got an outline there for our histogram. If you were really going to do it up nicely, there's a few other things that you would do in addition. So if I click back on our histogram there, under pivot chart analysis, if you click on the design button there, you can add chart elements. And so you can add labels for your axes. Say I wanted to label the horizontal axis as a title, and I want to call that Days of Recreational Leave. Get rid of the title there. And then say in addition, I also wanted to create an axis title for the vertical, and that is going to be need to delete that first. That's going to be frequency. Then I've started to create a chart that's really looking the part as well. You can also add a chart title up the top. But here you've got a histogram that's nicely grouped together. The axes are labeled. You put a chart title on that as well. And you've got something that's really looking the part. So why is this first model important for you? Firstly, it's helping you to do a frequency table in Excel using the pivot chart functionality. Secondly, if your frequency table is a bit too dense and it's got too many possible scores or values in it so that the frequency table is too long, then make a grouped frequency table instead. I showed you how to do that. Based upon the group frequency table then, we're able to take that data and make a histogram from it. Using some of the functionality in Excel. One of the other things you'll notice as I went through here, I wasn't giving you a click perfect example. I accidentally clicked on the wrong thing a few times. I'm going to have a think about that in the unit going forward as to whether I want to produce something that is absolutely flawless or whether it shows me in a few places misclicking or misspeaking. At this early stage in the unit, I'm happy to misspeak and misclick so long as it doesn't seriously take us off track. But if it does, I will then do some editing and make sure I fix that up. So that's model 1.1, and hopefully what you take from this then is the ability to apply these skills in our first stats lab, where I'm going to ask you some questions relating to your creation of pivot tables, frequency tables, group frequency tables, and histograms. When I set up these Excel spreadsheets as well, just as another piece of information, I will keep at the front here, I'll have two worksheets open. The first worksheet that you will see will just be the raw data that you can do all of your work on. But the second worksheet, if I click over it to a now, will be the fully worked answer to that particular model, just so you've got a point of reference in front of you in Excel. There we go. That was model 1.1. I hope you found that helpful.